Good evening all, and welcome. If any of you have the Amino app, or are interested in finding out what it is, it would mean a lot if you would connect with me on there. This app is another type of social media, but offers a load of fun other things too. So I'm going to leave you a link to my Amino in the description if you'd like to check it out, if you've got it already, but it's completely optional. It would just be cool if those who already have it, or those who would like to get it, would like to hang out at my Amino too. But anyway, with that being said, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I've come to the conclusion that I am a magnet for creepy encounters, crazies, and potentially dangerous situations, probably because I can be incredibly naive. But regardless, let me share my most recent crazy encounter, which happened just before my much-needed vacation to Arizona. For starters, I would like to say that I'm a fairly attractive female. Blonde hair, blue eyes, about 5'2" and 125 pounds. So not super tiny, but definitely not very big either. I also can't seem to tell when people are genuinely being nice to me, or if they're flirting, as I am super oblivious, which may be the cause for what transpired. I won't disclose exactly where I work, but I will say that I work at a warehouse/club that you have to pay a membership to in order to do your shopping. Specifically, I work in the membership department, so I deal with new sign-ups, questions, issues with memberships, credit cards, angry members who demand they speak with a manager, or want to complain to you, even though you have no control over a policy. As part of the member service department, we are expected to always be super happy-go-lucky, friendly, and helpful. Granted, our entire company is dedicating to making our members happy, but the membership desk is supposed to be the Disneyland of our warehouse. What the member wants, we will bend over backwards to try and make it happen, which can lead to some entitled jerks when they can't get their way, and some incredible scary encounters. For reference on just how crazy it can be, I had one co-worker get screamed at by a man twice her size because he was removed from the membership, which led to several other managers getting involved. A man who was the epitome of a serial killer and terrified members and managers, who was pushed by an angry member, and another member followed me around the store because she was mad that I only refunded her half her money, like I was told to do by my manager. But that's a story for another day. But most of the time, members are pretty nice about the situations that arise. My department is pretty close-knit, and despite us getting fairly competitive with our benchmark numbers, we're always there for each other and have each other's back, which I think is pretty important later on down the road for this story. So one day as I'm working, I have a gentleman come up to me with an issue about his membership/credit card. The guy, who I'll refer to as Chris, was probably around 6'2" to 6'3", of an average build, with dark hair, dark eyes, and a beard. He didn't seem to give off any creepy vibes, and was very polite as he tells me what the problem was. Apparently, he was trying to fill his bike up with gas. His membership/credit card wasn't being read properly, so he explains that he comes into town maybe once a week or so, and he's really only stopping at our store to fill up his tank. He also said that the card has his name on it, but it had his mum's membership number and her membership picture in the back, but that he is on her membership as her household member. I ask to see his card and driver's license, which he hands over to me as I type in the membership number to pull it up on our system. I continue to have a pretty decent conversation with him, as well as joke, as I was always the person to get weird and interesting issues with cards. Chris laughs, and after a moment, points beside me and tells me that he knows one of my other co-workers, Tim, as they used to work together at a fast food restaurant, and, "If he ever gives you trouble, let me know." I laugh it off and brush it off, thinking it's just the sort of inside joke between Tim and Chris, and continue to search through the membership. Turns out, Chris isn't anywhere on the membership, nor does it appear as though he was ever on the membership, or any other membership either. Pretty weird stuff. So I call over a supervisor and show her the system, and explain the situation to her, all the while continuing to crack jokes and have friendly banter with Chris while he waits. She says his best bet would be to call the credit card company we're partnered with and figure out what happened to put his name on a credit card tied to his mum's membership. He says he can do that, then asks if there's any way he can still get gas. The supervisor says sure, and tells me to call the gas station to let the attendant know Chris was coming down there and that he'd need help getting the gas. I tell the attendant when he answers the phone that Chris would be coming down with a motorcycle to get gas, briefly tell him what happened with his membership, then let the attendant know he's okay to get gas today. He just needs help getting it. The attendant says it's okay. I hang up, and Chris thanks me after telling me that my name was very beautiful and unique. I thank him, tell him to have a good day, and he leaves. I figured that was it. Right? Wrong. Fast forward a few days. I'm closing the membership desk with Tim, and I'm not entirely sure how we got onto the topic, but Chris comes up in our conversation. Tim asks me if I remember Chris, after a little description, and I say, "Oh, Chris, the guy with the really weird situation with the credit card and his mum's membership, right?" And then says something that made me uncomfortable. When he went outside for his break an hour or so after Chris had supposedly left, he ran into Chris hanging out by the front entrance. He says Chris flagged him down after sharing some brief pleasantries, and then Chris started acting a little twitchy and nervous, and says, "Hey, remember that girl who was helping me with my credit card? What was her name? She's cute. Is she single? I think she's got a thing for me, and I want to ask her out." Tim immediately tells him that, no, I'm not single, and that I'm just really nice, and that he probably misconstrued my friendly demeanor for something more. Tim then goes on to tell me that after he told Chris that I wasn't single, Chris became visibly upset, muttered something under his breath, and stormed off. Tim also told me, even if you were single, I still wouldn't have told him that you weren't. He's not that good of a guy. Dude's got some issues. Upon hearing this, my first reaction is to laugh nervously and brush off what Tim said as just a weird reaction. But on the inside, I'm freaking out. I've read too many stories and have watched too many crime shows to not think the worst, and I've had my fair share of insane encounters over the years to always be on edge. But I assume myself that nothing will come out of this situation, and I was just working myself up over nothing. Cut to Saturday, one of the busiest days for retail shopping. Membership and refunds are fairly busy. with anywhere between 5 to 15-minute intervals without members to give us downtime to clean, file paperwork and such. I'm having a pretty good day, just chatting with my co-workers and trying to be on top of everything, since it was at a slow period. We were running breaks, and our supervisor was doing some office work, so it was just me, Addie, Rick, who was filling up the kiosks, and Emmy, who was working on the returns that were trickling in. I was having a conversation with Andy and organizing the returns when I hear someone yelling at me from behind. Hey, I'm talking to you. I vaguely recognize the voice, but only when I turn around to see who's shouting at me do I know who it is, and my heart drops to my stomach. Standing in front of me is Chris, who looks hella pissed off and disheveled, glaring at me with a menacing look, hoping maybe he just needs some help and it's nothing serious. I plaster my friendly customer service smile and I walk over to the computer closet to where he was standing. Hi Chris, what can I do for you? Have another weird situation you need me to look at? I force out a laugh, but he doesn't even crack a smile. Instead, he points a finger at me, and when he speaks, his voice is this super low murmur that only added to the creepiness / menacing factor. You lied to me. By now, Addie seems to sense my discomfort and stands to the computer next to me, pretending to be working on something while listening in on the conversation. I tell Chris, I'm sorry? What do you mean? Did the bank not figure out the issue? He shakes his head and says that isn't the problem. I ask him what the problem is, and he says, You're the problem. You led me on. I'm sure my confusion is visible, and Addie and I exchange a glance. She subtly gestures if she should get a manager, and I subtly tell her no, before I turn my attention back to him. I ask what he means by that, and he states that I led him on when I knew he was flirting with me, because I was flirting back despite having a boyfriend, and that was a really horrible move. I say, I'm very sorry if it seemed that way, but I wasn't flirting with you. I was just being polite. I didn't realize you were flirting with me. I'm sorry. He starts to become more upset, pulling at his hair, rubbing his face, and says, No, you did know, and you were just pulling me along. I am not someone to be messed with like that, and you're gonna regret messing with me. At this point, Rick had come back from the kiosks, and Addie was quietly filling him in on the situation away from me and Chris, so that they wouldn't be overheard. Rick, who's a Navy veteran at a pretty large guy at 6'1" and heavy set, is watching Chris closely, and when Chris starts to seem threatening, he puts himself in the conversation. Rick asks Chris if there's a problem, but Chris ignores him and continues to berate me, while I stay quiet, too afraid to speak. He calls me a stuck-up something or other, who's probably with some arsewipe, if I even was with someone. Typical nice guy, am I right? And that I could have had it all, if I had just given him a chance. He continues to tell me that I wasted that chance the moment I led him on, and that he was going to make me pay. Chris then reaches over the counter and tries to grab my arm or slap me or something, but Rick pushes me to the side away from Chris, and Addie is on the radio calling for a supervisor or manager to come to the membership desk now. I remember seeing a front-end supervisor, Shadow, running from the cashier line to where the membership desk was, and I remember panicking, thinking that Chris might have a gun, and what if he tried to hurt someone with it? Meanwhile, as I'm worrying about what could happen, Rick is telling Chris he needs to calm down and not to speak to me that way. Chris then loses it and starts slapping his hands on the table and pointing at me, saying that I am a problem and he has every right to speak to me that way because I was being horrific. Shadow finally shows up as Chris continues to spew crude insults at me, and Shadow, after realizing Chris was yelling at me and seeing how upset I was, quickly tells me to take a break, before radioing for someone to help at membership and asking Chris what the problem was. I start to leave, and Chris starts to follow me. After a while, Rick and Shadow start following Chris to stop him. I feel myself on the verge of a panic attack and start speed walking while Chris continues to shout at me. And then he pushes me. I manage to catch myself on the battery display, and Rick and Shadow catch him up and attempt to detain him as best they could. And Addy makes another call to the warehouse manager and to our security guard while passers-by watch the whole situation go down. Shadow tells me to go, and this time I run to the break room, where I have a complete breakdown, shaking and crying and unable to breathe as other employees on their breaks ask if I'm okay and try to help out. After maybe 10 minutes, when I had just started to calm down, one of the warehouse managers, Lena, and the security guard comes in and asks if I can go with them into the office. I follow, and we go into the general manager's office and shut the door. They tell me to sit down, and after they ask me if I'm okay and ask what happened, to which I told them the entirety of the story, they told me that Chris got away. I am too shocked to ask anything other than, how? And they explained that not long after I left, and right before they arrived at the membership desk, Chris had managed to get out of the hold he was in and ran to the closed door beside the exit, which he pushed open to avoid the crowd, set off the alarm that Lena had to shut off, and then booked it to the parking lot. They spent the next 5 or so minutes trying to locate him, but he was gone, and there were no cameras outside the warehouse to try and capture his license plate or anything else. And because of his strange membership situation, and because we only had his first name and a description of what he looked like, there was no way we could pull him up in the system to notify authorities. The only thing we did have was a grainy video of him getting hostile at the desk, following and pushing me, then assaulting Rick by elbowing them in the face and pushing Shadow back, which wouldn't be difficult since Chris was about a head taller and larger than the supervisor to get away. I was livid that he escaped, but also terrified, and the feeling of fear only escalated when Lena said, "We want you to know that he threatened he'd be back." They offered to have a fellow co-worker walk with me to the car at the end of my shift, which I was more than thankful for, and that they would have locked security be more vigilant in making sure no one strange came by our store when we were closed, until the situation was either closed or died down. There was nothing more I could do, and the most my work could do was to keep on the lookout for Chris and alert others if he came into the store again. I felt powerless. I still feel powerless. Always being on the edge and on the lookout for Chris is driving me crazy. I'm so paranoid I'll somehow run into him. The walk to and from my car, before and after every shift, is terrifying, because I don't know if Chris is watching me. And if I think a vehicle has been following me for too long, I make random turns until I lose them. I'm scared Chris is going to come back to the store to find me when I'm alone and do something awful. The only peace I found was when I left the state for a week for a trip, but even then I was still a little paranoid. I keep my pocket knife close by at any point, and I'm planning on getting my concealed weapons permit just to feel safer. Does that make me crazy? It's been a little over 2 weeks since this whole situation went down, and I'm just praying that nothing sinister will come out of it. I spoke to my coworker Tim, who knew Chris beforehand, and he offered to talk to his old bosses to get Chris's information, so that we could give the police something to go on. From my understanding, the old manager didn't really want to give out Chris's information, but after Tim told him what was going on, and that the police are more than likely to get involved to keep him from hurting me or anyone else, he eventually gave him Chris's last name, a phone number, and an address, which we immediately gave to the police, and I filed a report. The only problem now is that they lead to dead ends. Bit of background. This occurred about 3 years ago, when I was 22 years old, and I was working at a fast food place with fried chicken galore. I had been working at a fried chicken restaurant for about a year. During that time, an older co-worker, who I'll refer to as CC, or Chicken Creeper, would get very friendly with me. I believe this man was in his mid-30s at the time, about 5'8", and of Latino descent. He was actually a shift leader, so would be in charge of me during shifts. I thought he was a relatively nice guy at first, until he started getting too chummy with me. It would start out completely innocent. He'd make friendly conversation with me about various topics, and I would do the same. I actually liked working with him in the beginning. He was easy to talk to, and wouldn't berate me if I made a few mistakes while working. I would also vent to him about annoying customers that I had to serve. Well, after he had gotten comfortable with me, he would get touchy. He would poke my side sometimes and my stomach. I don't particularly like older men touching me like that, especially if he's my supervisor at work. Almost everyone at my workspace, though, would act very close to one another, so I assumed it meant nothing, despite my discomfort. He would often poke me when no one else was around, which should have alerted me to how creepy his actions were. He would later make comments to me about how pretty I was, and would ask questions about my boyfriend and I regularly. Simply questions like, do you live together? You gonna get married soon? How old is he? Stuff like that. There was one night that I came in to pick up my check from work. It was my day off, and I was wearing makeup and a short, spaghetti string dress. One of my shift leaders greeted me as I went to get my check. CC was also working and came out to say hi. He noticed my outfit and said I looked sexy. Ew. I'd rather not have my supervisor refer to me as sexy, please. I just smiled and chuckled awkwardly, got my check, and left. There would be other times when I was working that he would get way too close to me and would stroke my face with his hand. I shivered and found an excuse to walk away. At this time I was wondering if I should say something to my manager. There were cameras at work everywhere, so maybe some of his creepy antics were caught on video. I decided against it though, and would confide in my friends about it instead. They also found Cece's actions creepy, and said that I should tell my boyfriend about it. I didn't really feel I had to though, because I didn't think that Cece had done much harm yet. I also really hate conflict, and thought that my boyfriend would try and convince me to tell my manager. A few weeks before I had decided to leave the fried chicken place, Cece did something I found very inappropriate. I was working that day and had just ended my shift. We were allowed to have drinks from the soda dispenser machine using the restaurant to-go cups, as long as we kept them in the walk-in freezer in the back. I had gotten a drink that day, and walked to the back to finish it off and throw the cup away, because I hate when people just leave their cups there for others to dispose of. Little did I know, though, that Cece was in there as well. I had started to avoid being alone in secluded parts of the restaurant with him, because that's usually when he would try and touch me. I was startled when I saw him, because I didn't see him walk into there beforehand. He asked me if I was leaving for the day, to which I replied, "Yeah, I am." "Why? Why can't you stay a little longer?" He would often ask me this when I was done working for the day, and I'd always say, "Because I'm tired and want to go home and sleep." He would usually just say, "Okay, bye." But this time he did something different. This time, he walked over to me and kissed me on the forehead. This disturbed me. But being so non-confrontational, I just smiled weakly, grabbed the cup, and hurried out. I told a couple of friends about this, and they got upset with me, and found Cece pretty revolting for doing this. They again told me to tell my boyfriend, but I didn't want to upset him, and kept it to myself. I eventually told him about a year later, and he was shocked and upset that I had not told him this while it was happening. I told him I didn't want to tell him because I thought he might try to confront Cece or my manager about it. I feel the saddest part about this was that he was actually married with children, and that she worked alongside us as well. His wife was also a shift leader, and I always found her pleasant to work with. I honestly didn't even know Cece was married, let alone that she was working nearby with us all this time. I was so surprised when she had told me while we were working together. She had mentioned she has a husband, and I asked her how long they were together. She said 15 years, and that they'd been working together in the same chicken place all this time. Astonished, I then asked her who her husband was, and she said it was Cece. "Really?" "Yeah, how did you not know that?" she said. I said people didn't really ask questions, because I don't like prying into personal lives unless they are okay with it. She then stated how they had 3 kids as well. I felt so guilty about it, wondering if I should tell her about her husband's flirtatious, wretched ways. I decided against it though, feeling it might strain their marriage, and fearing she might not believe me anyway. To my Kentucky Fried Creeper, I hope we never meet again. This happened when I was about 17 years old. For context, I am a 21-year-old girl. At the time, I was working at a failing seafood restaurant. I was a busgirl, so I had to deal with touching people's old, half-eaten seafood all day long. I'm a vegetarian, and have never liked anything that comes out from the water, not even shrimp. Working at a restaurant can be a super interesting job. The amount of people you meet through work is immense, and your co-workers can become like your family. You're all suffering together, and you can all become pretty close. The chefs at the restaurant were pretty strange. One was super chill and was always drunk and angry, and the last, well, he was something else altogether. To make things easier, I'll just call the creepy chef Creep. So Creep starts working. He's new, and he seems like a decent guy. He's in his mid to late 40s, salt and pepper hair, and nothing throws you off by seeing his physical appearance. I deeply love everything 60s and 70s, and so Creep and I would often talk about music, especially rock and roll. He seemed like a cool guy, someone who claimed he saw so many of the bands that I drool over daily. It seemed nice to work with someone who generally shared the same interests as me. So weeks go by, and Creep wasn't showing any signs of anything strange. I felt totally okay within my workplace, wouldn't blink an eye, and actually enjoyed the job. Me and a fellow busgirl became pretty close friends. We bonded over the fact that we both had pretty messed up family lives, so we instantly became work buddies. The restaurant was slow. Me and the busgirl were having a conversation, laughing, smiling, and joking in the kitchen. This changed in less than 5 seconds, when Creep came right behind me and says this in my ear. "This wouldn't be so funny if I had chloroform." I turn around to look at him, thinking, why the hell are you saying weirdo jokes like that? His eyes were blank. He was staring at me, but I felt as though his eyes were burning an imprint on my face. This staring lasted a few seconds, but eventually I just turned and walked away. Throughout the next week, the Creep would stare at me through the kitchen window while I was working. I tried to avoid going to the kitchen, but that was nearly impossible when it was my job to transport dishes from the tables back to the kitchen. Twice more, while in the kitchen, the situation repeated itself. I was talking to a fellow co-worker, and Creep would drop whatever he was doing and interrupt the conversation with, "Well, it wouldn't be so fun if I had chloroform on me." At this point he had mentioned chloroforms to me 3 times. I was freaked out. Luckily I stopped working there a few weeks later, because I was leaving to travel Europe for the summer. When I returned, the restaurant was already shut down, so I didn't see Creep ever again after this. I wish I would have told my manager at least. I don't know what I was thinking. I clearly wasn't. No one should ever have to feel that threatened at their workplace. This has been happening over the course of the last few days. I've been a little shaken up by it. A bit of backstory. I just moved and left everyone behind in Florida, and I'm about 1,600 miles away, so I'm living alone with just my dog. I've been working at this place for 2 months now, and at my old store, I never had this problem. I work at a popular restaurant / fast food chain, and there's this guy who comes in every day. As per new company rules, we have to be overly nice to customers, and they want us to be on first name basis with our regulars. Whatever, I can do that. I'm actually really good with customer service. So we introduced ourselves the other day. He's a really nice guy, easily 37 to 42 years old, and I found out last night he's actually 47. I came in the other day to work, and I patted him on the arm as I walked by, and said hi, because I'm nice. Well, this past Thursday, he comes in and instead of sitting in his usual spot with his co-workers, as they all sit near our takeout window, which is where I was working, this guy gives me his business card, tells me to text him later, winks, and sits down, and proceeds to casually look over at me and watch me occasionally. I told a few of my managers, and everyone laughed at me. I was so uncomfortable until he left. I went home and started to think maybe I had overreacted to the situation, and tried brushing it off. I mean, the guy just assumed I was interested in him because I was being nice. Right? Fast forward, the creepy guy got worse. He came in, and I was on the cash register, so I had to interact. First thing he said to me was, "I'm sorry if I was too forward the other day." I said it was fine, and started ringing out the next person. He left. I went to our takeout side again, and lo and behold, he's sitting there. Great. I try avoiding him at all costs, but he's fully on staring. He waves at me and asked why I never texted him. I showed him my hand with a fake engagement ring on it. My mom's boyfriend and I agreed this would be the easiest way to stop this. This is why me being alone is important. They're both back in Florida and can't help me much. And he said, "Oh," and left me alone. Then he came up and asked for more ice cream, and someone else got it because we knew he just wanted me to get it, so he could talk to me again, as he had asked me directly. He then came back and asked for toothpicks to me again, and someone else fetched them. Then he left, and the co-workers were starting to understand why I was freaking out. Fast forward to later that day. I'm off at 4 and it's 3:15. He comes back for a bag of chips. Alone. He sat in the corner where I couldn't see him, and he moved to the takeout window again, then moved back to his hiding spot. Then he came up to the window while I was there. I said, "Hey." He didn't even answer. Just stared at me for a solid 30 seconds, then walked away. And then I saw him leave. I was relieved, but had to have someone walk me to my car and went to buy pepper spray. All the while, my general manager was making fun of the situation the whole time, and another manager that didn't witness this guy said, "I don't believe that. He's a nice guy," and my co-worker Jen went off on him. The one most messed up part of this, my manager refuses to ban him from the store, after admitting that what he was doing was creepy. I spoke to my old manager back in Florida about it, and said after the first incident he'd have banned the guy. So, I'm still forced to interact with him. So Dave, despite the fact I'll probably see you tomorrow, let's not meet again. I'm a smallish 20-something-year-old female that works in a medium-sized, usually safe, town. With that being said, my office is in one of the bad parts of town. There was a recent stabbing just down the block, and some nearby drug/human trafficking issues. I should also note that I work with sex offenders, so I'm not easily creeped out. Because of our office location and clientele, we usually keep our office door locked and have a buzzer that alerts us when someone comes in. On to the story. The other day I needed to briefly stop by my office to pick up some forms before an early morning meeting. I was running late, so by the time I got to the office I was frazzled and in a rush. Since I was only going to be there for a few minutes, and no one ever came to my office that early, I didn't lock our entrance door. Spoiler, this was a bad idea. I'm doing my thing when the door buzzer goes off. Our office space is shaped weird, so we can't see our entrance from most other areas. I was surprised, but just assumed one of my co-workers came early. After a few minutes of not hearing her usual friendly greeting, I went to check. The man was standing in the lobby. As you can imagine, it wasn't who I was expecting. This guy looked like an Italian Martin Short, so I'm immediately on edge because something about him seemed off, and he had a creepy-ass grin on his face. He stated that he worked with a different company in our building, but no one was there, so he was wondering if he could use our phone. This set off another red flag, because the other company in our building opens extremely early and always has people there. I lied to him and told him we didn't have any office phones because I didn't want him following me to my office. He then started rambling about how he needs to call someone or else he'll be stuck here for hours. Then he changed his story and said something about driving an hour away to the worksite if he can't make this call. The rambling didn't make sense, and the story kept changing slightly. It didn't seem like he was confused or on drugs. It seemed like he was trying and failing to make up a story on the fly. Partially because I was in a rush, and partially because I hadn't had my coffee yet and wasn't thinking clearly. I decided to give in and let him use my cell phone. At this point I was pretty confident this was a ruse to steal my phone. But whatever, it was old and crappy anyway. He starts telling me the number to dial, but when I'm halfway through punching the digits in, he pulls out a cell phone and looks up the rest of the phone number. This guy had a cell phone in his pocket the whole time. But I tried to rationalize and thought maybe he's not financially well off, and he doesn't have a cell phone with service. He makes the call with my phone, and there's no answer, so he thanks me then leaves, setting off the door buzzer again. Relieved he's gone, I go back to my office to finish up and head out. A few minutes later I head back through the lobby to leave, and the guy is back again. I didn't hear him come back into our lobby because this increasingly creepy creeper never shuts the door after leaving the first time. The buzzer only goes off when someone opens it, not when someone closes it. I'm positive he left it open intentionally so he could sneak back in without the buzzer going off. He asks to use my phone again, but I'm pissed at his sneaky bullcrap and tell him I'm leaving and he needs to leave too. We both leave with our incident. However, before I drove past the parking lot, I checked my rear view to see where he was. He was talking to someone on his cell phone, watching me leave. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. God, the workplace can be a creepy place. So glad I don't work in an office anymore. And my respects to all of those who still do. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts, as that always helps me out a whole lot. And remember, if you have Amino, please connect to the Mortismedia Amino linked in the description. It will help me out a lot. If there's a story that you would like to share and have narrated in an upcoming video, feel free to email it to me. Just be sure to pump it full of description, punctuation, and good and colourful language to maximize the chances of your story being read. But for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.